I was one of 3 children, but my sister was quite sick and died quite young. And I had a brother that grew up to manhood, but also died quite a few years ago, which left me as the only child, not a child, but the only one remaining of my family. For my father, I don't remember, or very slightly, and my mother was left with us 3 children, quite young. And to help ease the burden upon herself, she placed me with the Alfred Shakers through the advice of an aunt that had once had some relative that lived there, although I didn't know her at the time. I went to the Shakers on July 7th, 1903, a very hot July day. I remember leaving Providence on the train early in the morning, and it seemed to me I rode all day long, and I guess we must have ridden the most of the day, because I didn't get to Alfred till about 5 o'clock at night, when I was met there by one of the brethren with a horse and buggy, such as was the transportation we used in those days. And I was taken to the trustee's office. My mother also was with me, and we stayed there overnight. And in the morning, Elders Fanny Casey, who was the elders at Alfred at the time, and by the way, she also had been the one that was instrumental in taking me there, came down to the office to see us, and with her she brought Elders Harriet Coolbroth from the second family at Alfred. And I had become a little bit attached to Elders Fanny, probably because I saw her first, and I was quite disturbed because she was going to send me down to the second family with Elders Harriet. And however, I was told to go, so I went down to the second family. At that time, there was just one little girl about my own age there. And didn't seem to be very happy to start with. And I remember sitting out back of the house in the swing and planning that when they weren't watching me so well, and they got a little used to me and didn't know everything I did, that I'd run down across the pasture and down over the mountain, up over the mountain, and go home to Providence. But however, by the time they didn't watch me so well, I had changed my mind, and I never did try that trip across the mountain. I grew very, very fond of Elders Harriet. She was the mother that I needed, and as a young child, I thought that there couldn't possibly be anyone any lovelier. And while she was very kind and gentle, she was also very strict on discipline. She watched our movements very carefully and trained us very well. And I have always felt that all through my life I was influenced by those very first early days that she was so careful with my training along with the other children. There were soon others my age, so we had quite a little group there. And we were given a certain amount of small chores to do to teach us how to work. We would have perhaps a back walk to sweep off in the morning. We early learned to make our own beds, as well as those of us that were big enough to reach up to it. Most of us were. And then as we grew older, or a little more able, we helped take care of the room. We swept the floor and tidied up the room, or we were given a flight of stairs to brush down. And then we moved from that into the kitchen department to help with the dishes. I remember to start with, we used to have to pick up the dishes and perhaps crumb the table. Then later we'd help with the washing of the dishes and help set the table, and later we'd help with the sweeping. Everything seemed to be organized so that we learned one thing at a time. I never remember being too crowded with what we had to learn, but when we did one thing well, we would have another duty given to us, and so on from there, until we could accomplish most of the small tasks in the kitchen. And at the same time, we were also taught small knittings and sewing, and periods of reading and studying of poems and singing. Elders Harriet was a great one for teaching songs and having the family come together and learn them, especially the old ones that she liked. And that way I learned many, many of the older songs, which we haven't used for many years, but which I would love to use if there are enough that knew them. And we were also given the privilege of learning, having piano lessons within a limited reason. We didn't go into it extensively because we couldn't afford the teaching that would require, but I did learn to play to amuse myself and just play in Sunday school and somewhat in very little, though, I would say. I have assisted in the church on the organ, but I never did take anything to do with the organ, so I didn't learn that, or didn't learn to play that so that it was, well, it wasn't properly played, I will say. We had also assisted in the making of the fancy work. When the winter months would come, we'd help with the poplar work. We younger sisters did the weaving. They wove the poplar strands on the hand looms with a cotton warp, and we would learn to iron it and cut it and make it into the fancy boxes. And we also made most any article that we felt would sell in the store that we were equipped to handle, we helped make. And in the summer, we used to have large berrying parties and take our dinner and go in the woods and stay all day and pick berries, but not too far. I wasn't too much profit in that life, for I never was a good berry picker. And I remember when I was small, there used to be quite a group of us, and I never could get any berries in my peel. I think the most of them went in my mouth. And I used to have a companion that was with me, and she used to keep telling me to hurry up and pick some berries. And I never did bother, because I knew before we went home she'd put her pail aside and fill my pail for me, and we had enough, so that was all right. I didn't have any trouble out of it because I took plenty of berries home. And we sometimes would help with the canning of the berries. And at that time we used to have, well, the canning industry was good, but it was rather, I would say it was all done with the home equipment. We didn't have the pressure cookers and the big kettles that we had later. And we had the preserving room at the laundry, and we'd take, that was part of it, and we would take our berries or whatever we had to preserve, whether it was vegetables or fruits or whatever, out there to the preserving room, and we'd all help with the peeling and the bottling of it. And then we had large boilers that we'd put them in on the flat top stoves and boil them, process them the length of time that need be. And in that way we stored a great deal of winter supply from the summer gardens and the berries that we enjoyed picking and the fruits for our winter food. And in the winter we'd often enjoy telling over how we gathered them in the summer. But I think that the ones that enjoyed gathering had more enjoyment out of that than I did. I think I was a little too slow. Then as each young girl grew to be old enough, they took their turn in learning how to cook, one thing at a time. Perhaps they'd make the bread and then the pies and the cake. And when the opening came, they were put to the kitchen to learn to take over the duties as a head cook. I think I was about 15 when I took over that duty, and I enjoyed it, so that to me was no work because it was very easy, and I came by it quite naturally, and it was a very simple task. Oh, but I seem to have skipped out that I went to school at all. We had the little country school, and all the grades up to the 8th was in that one school, and we had our own teacher. Her name was, that time we had a Sister Ellen Griffin that was teaching school. And I quite remember that I didn't want to bother with the multiplication tables during the year that I had those, and I didn't do very well. But summer before we went back to school, there was a girl about my age that came there to live, and she was she knew all the multiplication tables and quite a lot more. I didn't tell her that I didn't know them, but when I went to school Monday morning, I learned them and said them by recess time, the whole of them to the teacher, showing that I could have repeated them, but it wasn't interested. I think that's the only answer to that. But we had great enjoyment in the country schools, and as I look back on it now, I think we came away when we left the school with more for what we had the school years that we had than they take out now when most of them leave high school, from any observations that I've had from the ones that leave high school here. In fact, there's many things that were put into the studies in the grade schools in those days that they don't even bother to learn now, which to me is a great mistake, because I think sometimes those are the basic things, and they would make out much better with their later studies if they had those basic studies. But however, I'm not an educator, so I just think this, and I don't imagine it'll make much difference in the modern day education. But I graduated from the Shaker School there in Alfred and went to work in the family with whatever duty that I found necessary, or that was found necessary for me to take up. And as I say, I was the head cook in the kitchen, and I assisted in much of the making of the sale work for the store, and where they take the trips out. They used to go to Kennebunk and Ogunquit and Portsmouth, all along the shore, and Elder Henry Green used to take trips through the White Mountains twice a year, so we had about all we could do to keep up plenty of work for him to take on those trips to sell. He used to take 2 trips to the shore a year and 2 trips to the White Mountains, and then the sisters took shorter trips that also had to have a great deal of a great many things supplied for the sales. We went on down. I lived there at the second family until I was a little over 19. And after the First World War, things began to be a little straightened. I think that possibly the war conditions had something to do with it, and perhaps not. I never really did know, but by that time we decided to conserve and unite the 2 families together. We didn't live a great distance apart. In fact, the church family was at the top of the hill, and we were right at the foot of it, which it wasn't a steep hill either, and I should think it was perhaps about 3 or 4 rods from one to the other. I don't think it had been much more than that, possibly 5. And we used to walk up to church, and we walk up in the morning, Sunday mornings, and we walked up at the evening meeting, summer and winter, so it wasn't too great a distance. But however, in 1917, we decided to dissolve the second family and all move up to the church family. And one of the greatest joys to us was that Elders Harriet Kubroth was to be installed in the church family as the eldest there. And Elders Mary Walker, that had been at the head of the church family, was going to move to the trustee's office as first trustee. Her health wasn't too good, and I think possibly they felt that it would make it a little easier. And then Elders Harriet had the gift with young people, which few people ever had, and I think that it was a very great help, both in the growth of the society and for the young people that went up there. I think there were 17 of us altogether that went up, and I'm a little bit forgetful about that, but I think there were 17 of us. And one was Brother Stephen Gowen, who had lived there at the second family since he was a small boy. And he was very helpful to the sisters. In fact, I don't think I've ever known such a well, shall I say, a devoted, real Shaker brother as he is, not casting slights upon anyone, but we didn't realize how much he did mean to us until we lost him, because no chore, no kindness was ever too small for him to do for us. And if we wanted something, somehow or other, he found a way to get it or to do it for us. And I think sometimes it was, perhaps we were more or less unreasonable in what we did want, because it came so easy. Perhaps if we hadn't received quite so much attention, we wouldn't have demanded so much. But however, we moved up there in November, I think it was, in 1917. And Elder Harriet is his first elder, Sister Eva Libby is the second, and then Elder Mary Walker was first trustee, and Sister Edith Gardner, also trustee, with Elder Henry Green, who was also still up to the church family.
We've reached then the point that the two families are united in 1917, and you're by this time 19, am I correct?
I think I was 19 years
Let's
old.
talk a little bit about some of the things that you did as a child and some of the things that you recall as a younger child in terms of Shaker beliefs and Shaker ideas, Shaker ideology, how you were integrated into the Shaker community. You went in at 7, being placed into the family. How then were you exposed to Shaker doctrines and so forth during your early life?
Well, we had our Sunday morning services up to the church, but the other services, Elders Harriet always carried on at the second family. We had a Saturday night service and a Wednesday night service. We had Sabbath school, and in all of these things, she was very careful to teach the Shaker doctrine and to teach the Shaker songs. In our Sunday school, we used to have the Union Quarterlies, but in addition to that, as we studied our Bible and the life of Jesus and the disciples and whatever were in those quarterlies that were published by the Union's, I was trying to think of the name of the company that, International Bible Lessons, we learned that, but in addition to it, she always brought in some study on the teachings of the Shakers, the older Shakers, mostly among the children. It was the teachings of how to conduct ourselves and lessons that would be conducive to training us to be good and be appreciated, be honest. Just ordinary good Christian lessons, but they were always from the little Shaker books that we learned these. Then as we went on, as we grew old enough to understand the Shaker doctrines, we took those up also, but the books were always in all of the rooms, that anyone that chose to read them could read them. And I very early read all that I could find, because I was very curious as to know whether I wanted to be a Shaker or not. And if I decided to be a Shaker, why I wanted to be a Shaker. So all of the books that I could find, I read from cover to cover, and then would ponder over it myself until I was satisfied that whatever I had read, I too agreed with, that I could see it as I had read it. There were a great many things at that time, of course, that I didn't fully comprehend, but wisely I left them until I could, and as I went from one step to another, generally the comprehension of it came to me, even though it was at some later time. And during that period of my life, I think, was when I developed an affection for the people and an admiration and almost an affection for the religion. But as I went on and grew a little older, it began to take such a hold of me, and I began to understand it so much that I fully decided that I wanted to accept it as my life work, and the Shaker theology and teachings to me seemed so simple that I could see nothing else. But Elders Harriet, in her teaching, or in her bringing up, never forced it upon us. she taught it, and she left it open to ourselves to make our decision one way or the other. If we had our reading before us, and we weren't limited to that. There was enough other good reading also. We didn't have the reading that they have now because I don't think there was as much, but we had good magazines and good books around the house and the family, but always in the rooms we had the opportunity to read and delve into the Shaker books. If anyone was so minded, they had no reason what they could study into it very deeply.
Do you recall any of the early magazines and the books that you might have read during those days?
Well, I know we always had the Youth Companion as a magazine. I don't know as you people would remember it. And always there was a book they used to call a Chatterbox that they used to get from year to year, and that was a big, thick book, and I think it was a yearly publication, but it was a heavy book, and it took nearly a year to go through it. And then there was some lighter reading, like, I remember when we were small, we used to have the Five Little Peppers, books of that kind that were instructive to children, and Louisa Alcott, and all books of that sort. But I can't remember especially what the book, but it was always good, clean literature and good, clean books that we had. I don't remember anything other than what was, well, I would give anyone to read now.
Do you think that during that time that every one of the children that you were in association with felt the same way that you did about Shakerism? Was
Oh,
it
I know
universal feeling?
definitely they didn't. I know definitely they didn't. Some didn't care, and then some were very, well, they weren't hesitant to say so. They didn't like it, didn't want to stay. But that was, I mean, that was to be expected because nobody sees, no two people always see things alike. And we're all constructed a little bit differently, I presume, so that one comprehends things that another doesn't. And in fact, of the children, at that period, I was the only one that did stay out of the children that were there at that time.
And how many children did you say that there were?
I think there were 6 at one time of us in that group. And then there was, I remember especially one thing that had a great deal of influence on my young life. There was an older sister. She was 90 years old, and her name was, she was Sister Polina Springer. And I was given the chore to wait on her. If she wanted anything, I was to get her milk, or I was to, if she didn't come to supper, I was to see if she had everything she wanted. If she didn't, I was supposed to go to the cooks and tell them that Sister Pliny wanted this or that. And I thought myself that she was about as near an angel as anyone could be. So it was no cross and no trial for me to wait on her, because I would run back time and again to see if I could do something when I knew there was nothing to be done. And she was taken ill very suddenly, I think about after she had been 90, about 6 months. And in September she was taken sick one day, and I think she was sick about 24 hours. And I know Eldest Harriet came out and told us that Sister Pliny was very sick, and they didn't expect her to be with us very long, but she wanted to see me. And I thought it was the most wonderful thing to think that I could see her again, so I went in, and she said, I want to talk with you a minute. I think this must have been about 9 o'clock in the morning. She says, I want you to promise me that you'll be a Shaker. I was 9 years old at the time. And she said, take my hand and promise me that you'll be a Shaker. So I put my hand into hers and told her I would be. Of course, at that time, I didn't know what it meant. I loved her, and I loved the people, and I thought that that was easy enough to promise. But years later, I knew that that promise was from the childish heart, and it had to be made over again with a vow to God before I could really make a pledge to be a Shaker. But that always, through my life, I've always had a little hope that she was sort of always near and ready to guide my steps somewhat. And somehow or other I've hoped it a long time, and I still hope it.